Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Newhallywood Silent Film Festival. I'm E.J. Stevens, and if you search around Hollywood for very long, and there's a small little web, really, of key people that are the main players in the whole silent film world, and we get to talk to one of them today. Karie Bible, she is a longtime silent film aficionado, and we'll talk about that. But she's also got a really interesting job at Hollywood Forever Cemetery as the tour guide. And she's also the latest in a long line of ladies in black for Rudolph Valentino. So we'll talk about that as well. Well, hi, Karie. How are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm also, by the way, on the board of Retro Format, which we do silent film screenings both in person and online. And we do educational initiatives, and I'm very, very involved with Retro Format as well.
You also led a tour of Hollywood Forever Cemetery for us, and we're going to be showing that, I believe, on Saturday at 6 p.m. During the festival. But the first thing I really wanted to talk to you about is you, Karie Bible.
Well, as a little girl, I was born and raised in Fort Worth, Texas, and when I was about maybe 5, 6 or so years old, I saw Bela Lugosi and Dracula on TV on the Sunday horror matinee. And that was the first film I ever remember seeing. And I just fell absolutely 100% in love. And I remember thinking, I want that. Whatever that was, I didn't really know at the time, but I remember thinking, I want to be in this world. And every Sunday they'd have the horror movie matinee. So one week it would be Frankenstein or Dracula or Creature from the Black Lagoon or the Wolfman. The horror, universal horror was the gateway drug, if you will. I think millions of film fans would say the exact same thing. That's the gateway drug. So, and of course that led me to my first silent, which was Lon Chaney in Phantom of the Opera. And he's still, to this day, one of my absolute favorites. I think he is one of the greatest artists in film history. He's just, there's no one that has ever rivaled his versatility. And he's just sublime. And I just fell in love with classic film and silent film, which is kind of an even further, niche, really. I went to film school. I graduated in 1997. I moved to LA in 2000. And I heard about the San Francisco Silent Film Festival. And I thought, that sounds like the greatest thing in the world. So I've been going to that every year since about 2001. And so I go to that. And one of my fantasies is to go to the Pordenone Film Festival in Italy. I was supposed to do it in 2020, but we know how that worked out.
Right.
Also, I've been to the Kansas Silent Film Festival, and I love silent film so much. I think these people were just incredible artists and pioneers, and they were really laying the groundwork for an entire art form. And so I just have such a love and affection for them and for their films.
I have been lucky enough to be on a couple of your tours of Hollywood Forever. Now, that might sound kind of creepy to some people, that people like you and me just absolutely love Hollywood Forever Cemetery. How did you get involved in that side of things?
It's funny. Over the years, I've talked to journalists, and one of the questions I get asked is, isn't this creepy? Isn't this depressing? And I always say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how to answer that, because I grew up around the corner from a cemetery called Bluebonnet Hills in Texas. My brother and I learned to ride bikes in that cemetery. So for me, and I know this sounds crazy, but being around a cemetery was very normal. That was like every day of my life, from like a toddler till I left home for college. I walked or drove past a cemetery. It was just a normal thing, And when I moved to Hollywood in 2000, I saw Hollywood Forever and just fell completely in love. That place is magic, and anyone who's been there will tell you that it is. And I was so in love with it. And I thought, well, I wonder if they have a tour. I'd love to take it. And then I asked around, they really didn't. And I thought, maybe I could be the person who gives it. And my mom and dad are really interested in history, specifically the Civil War. So I grew up going to Civil War battle sites and houses and locations from like childhood up till adult life. So I'd seen docents, I'd seen living history, I'd seen all that stuff. And it was fascinating to me because it's like it brought history to life,
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, maybe I could kind of do my own little part to bring history alive in my own right. So even if it's not as comfortable as, say, blue jeans or whatever, yeah, I wear a beautiful black dress when I do the tour. I try to do what I can to channel the history here in Hollywood. And I love it. I mean, for me, the coolest thing is when I get people going, you know what? I don't know much about classic film, but I'm going to check out some of that stuff you mentioned, or I'm going to go home and watch this stuff or read about this stuff. And to me, that is what gets me out of bed every day. That is what gives me hope that this art form will never die.
You're one of those wonderful people that are keeping these people, their memory alive. And I completely get what you're saying about Hollywood Forever being so magical because, well, it just seems like Hollywood history written in stone.
It is. I mean, and it's not just Hollywood too. It's like every single headstone there's a story.
It's a life.
About World War I, World War II, about, anything really. I mean, it's just, there's so full of history and stories. And I think that's what draws a lot of people, besides just me, to cemeteries in general. Tyler
Cassidy, who owns Hollywood Forever, has just been a wonderful proponent of keeping these folks' memories alive. What are some of your favorite places around there? Because most of our folks that are watching this have never been there.
I love Valentino, of course. I mean, that is very, very special for me. And really so many places. There's almost nowhere where I don't feel a sense of history and a sense of, I don't even know what the word is, but to me, that place is just fascinating and always will be,
One of the things that Tyler's done there is really kind of bring back the old idea of a cemetery, that it's a park. It's not just for the dead, it's also for the living. And so there's all kinds of great programs there. Dia de los Muertos around November, all the other things. But one of the really great programs is the one that you do every year on Valentino's birthday. Can you tell us about that?
Oh yeah, every year. Well, it's actually on the anniversary of his death. It's every year on August 23rd. It's the longest running continual event in Hollywood history. And it's put on by Chanel O'Farrell of the cemetery, Tracy Terhune, who's a Valentino expert, and Alan Ellenberger. He's the official historian of Hollywood Forever. And a team of people work like all year to put this on. And we even had it this year during the pandemic. So,
oh, did you have it this year?
Yeah. We wore masks and had it under a tent outside and all that. But the thing is that it helps keep his memory alive. And every year we have a lot of attendees. We have singers, we have poetry reading, we have film clips. And it's a wonderful way to, it's not a celebration of his death, but rather it's commemorating the anniversary of his death and celebrating his life and his legacy.
What do you find so fascinating about Valentino?
I was like a freshman in college the first time I saw Valentino on a big screen, right? And I'm kind of old-fashioned. Well, surprise, surprise. I love seeing movies on a giant screen. The visceral power of that, it cannot be matched. And the first time I saw him on a huge screen, I saw Blood and Sand, which is a really good one. And I just looked up and I was like, wow. And I'm sure women in 1922 said the exact same thing that I said at the time. And I was just like, I got to see more of this man. Yeah.
He had star power, didn't he? I mean, it just jumps right off the screen even today.
Yeah, it's so obvious, and he's got so much charisma. And I think he was so unique. I mean, Sasu Hayakawa was also an exotic star, but for the most part, a lot of the male prototypes were sort of the clean-cut, all-American male kind of things. And Valentino was sensual. He was exotic. He was unapologetic. He was Italian. And I just don't think there'd ever been anyone like that before. And there's never been anyone like that since. So there was something very magical about him and very kind of transfixing, if that makes sense.
A person in his life that's always fascinated me is June Mathis.
Yes, yes.
Who happens to now be buried next to him. Tell us about her.
Well, June Mathis was a screenwriter, and she wrote for Colleen Moore, for Buster Keaton.
Mm-hmm.
She was an executive at Metro. She was extraordinarily talented. And I think when Valentino first came to Hollywood, at that time, unfortunately, they really liked to stereotype. And if you looked foreign or ethnic, you would be cast as the villain, the jerk, the lousy boyfriend, some kind of a negative trope, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Valentino was cast in those kind of villain roles because, I mean, he doesn't look like Kansas City. I mean, he clearly looks, Italian.
Mm-hmm.
But June Mathis saw him in a film called Eyes of Youth. And I've seen that film. He's maybe in a third of it,
Okay.
but he jumps off the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see it, and June did, she looked at that and saw, that guy has got something very special. And in Hollywood, this happens quite a lot, actually, especially in the studio system. They'd have a great star and they would not really know what to do with them, what kind of parts to cast them in, what kind of movies were best suited. They just kind of were a little undecided as to how to handle that person's, career. Well, June knew exactly what to do with Valentino. She got it,
Mm-hmm.
and I think she deserves a tremendous amount of credit for Valentino's success. She was writing and in charge of the production on a film called Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which turns 100 years old this year.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I want that vaccine like yesterday. So I can put the 35 milliliters
Right.
that movie. But anyway, so she saw Valentino and insisted he get the lead in Four Horsemen. And she got what she wanted. And the rest, as they say, is history. And that movie is truly a star-making performance. It really is. There's certain performances from certain stars. You see it and you're like, that's the minute they became a huge star.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see that movie, he tango dances, he romances a woman, he fights in a war. It's just such a good movie. It's by far my favorite of his films.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think she basically just took a huge risk on this big budget movie with basically a complete unknown.
She was so smart. And I think she knew a good thing when she saw one. Like, again, I think people looked at Valentino and just thought, okay, he's the villain, he's the criminal, whatever. But I think it's a real talent to have when you can look at a person or even an antique or an object or something and not just see what is there on the surface, but see what that could be. And I think she saw Valentino and she thought, okay, I'm seeing him, but I'm also seeing what he could be. And again, not everybody sees that. A lot of people just see what's right there and they don't dig deeper to think, wow, there's so much more this person can do. They just need the right vehicle to do it.
Valentino passed away unexpectedly, 1926, and or 27. I always get that wrong. 26, yeah. So that was a huge moment in a lot of folks' lives when they heard the news.
Oh, yeah. There was one woman in England who actually committed suicide. And her suicide note read, "With his death, my last bit of courage has flown." So it was a big deal. And what's funny is on the tours that I give, sometimes I do school groups and I have to do them a little bit differently for different age groups. I had a group of teenage girls that were like 13, pre-pandemic, of course.
Yeah.
And I was talking about Valentino and I just looked at this sea of blank stares, like coming back to me.
Right.
And I've been doing this long enough to where I can just look in the faces and go, I'm losing these kids. I got to come up with something else. So I stopped myself and I said, okay, what star do you guys love right now? And they all said Beyonce. And I said, okay, fair enough. Say you woke up tomorrow morning and you picked up your iPhone, you get a text, Beyonce's dead. One of the girls started crying and I was like, no, she's fine. She's better than fine. She's Beyonce. But what if that happened? And they were all like, so I think sometimes you have to kind of equate something to something modern for younger people to understand. But I mean, Valentino was so beloved. He was so beautiful. He was so talented. He was so unique. And it just seemed inconceivable that he could just so quickly be taken from us. And thousands and thousands of people lined the streets of New York to see his body lying in state. A riot broke out. The police were called in. It was total chaos. And they brought his body by train from New York to Los Angeles. And Italian immigrants around America would actually go to the train stations to watch the train pass through.
Okay.
And if you think about it, which I think about these things a lot, a lot of these stars, when they die young, be it James Dean, Harlow, Marilyn Monroe, it's not just the loss of a star or their work or whatever, but what hits us very profoundly, I think, is what they meant in our lives. And I think for Valentino, for a lot of women who are maybe lonely and unfulfilled, he represented love and passion and excitement and romance, which they may not have had. And I think for a lot of immigrants in America, he represented hope. If you think about it, he came here, an 18-year-old kid off the boat from Italy with nothing. And he died one of the most celebrated, beloved people in the world. So it's not a stretch to think those families could have been thinking, you know what, guys, he can make it in America. Maybe we will too.
We always hear about untimely deaths, but I've always kind of wondered about Valentino as having a timely death, not for him, but for his legend. And what I mean by that is this was right at the end of the silent era. Talkies were coming in. Would we still know about Valentino if he had survived, like lived into the talkie era?
I think in regards to Valentino's future, had he lived, there are two different outcomes, and I've definitely thought about them myself. I think the first one would have been he might have gone the way of John Gilbert, because John Gilbert was sort of Valentino's rival. And he was also extremely romantic and beautiful, and women loved him, and, you know, all that. So I think, and when John Gilbert, there's a lot of reasons for what happened to him, but one of them was when you put that I love you kind of romanticism of silent film to dialogue, it comes across as campy or cheesy, or it doesn't quite transcend from silent into sound.
Singing in the rain.
Yeah, that same fate could have befallen Valentino, or here's the positive fate that I think and like to think could have happened. Okay, Greta Garbo was foreign, and also she was a silent film star who made the transition. Well, MGM was very smart about the way they handled that, because they kind of kept Garbo from sound as long as humanly possible. Like the last silent film made at MGM was a Garbo film. So they kept her from it as long as they could. They found the right script, the right director. They really worked with her very carefully on this film. They put a lot of time, money, and care into launching the campaign, launching the film. And of course, that film, Anna Christie, was Garbo's talking debut. Garbo talks, it was such a big deal. And she became even bigger in sound than she was in silent film. And I like to think, had Valentino had the same treatment, had they worked with his accent, worked with his voice, waited as long as they could, found him the right vehicle, had he been handled very carefully with expertise like Garbo had, I think he could have absolutely made it in sound. I mean, I'm a big fan of pre-code. So can you imagine Valentino in pre-code? I mean, he could have sizzled much more in pre-code, frankly. And, you know, if you think about it, he was 31 when he died. I mean, he had a lot more years ahead of him to make films and to be a movie star. So I like to think that he could have absolutely flourished in sound, again, with the right handling in place.
Now, one of the things that's kind of kept his legacy alive was the whole Lady in Black thing. I know there's been a lot of them, and you are now the official Lady in Black for Valentino. Tell us about all that.
There's rumors that it was a publicity stunt orchestrated by Russell Birdwell, who was a publicist, but Tracy Terhune, who is the Valentino authority, expert, historian, collector, etc., he actually showed me footage of the original Lady in Black on a talk show in the early 50s, talking about becoming the Lady in Black. And her name was Dietra Flamme. Her story goes that as a young woman, she was very sick in the hospital, and somehow her mom had known Valentino socially and got him to pay a visit. And when he did, he brought her a red rose. And he said, you know, I know you're going to get better and you're going to outlive me. I just want you to remember me. And this was her way of making good on that promise that she would always remember Valentino. So she showed up off and on for about 50 years. Wow. And then, of course, other ladies in black would follow suit throughout the years for a variety of different styles and reasons. And then I started doing it in 2002. And I really just decided to take it up because there was no one doing it at the time, at the service anyway. And so I collect vintage. I wear a vintage gown, black veil, bring a red rose every year. But here's the thing. A lot of the time I get asked, are you going to get angry or jealous if other women show up and do this? The answer is no, because in the past there were cat fights or jealousies. I really hate that sort of thing. I think in our world, women are constantly pitted against each other. And I really hate that and I reject that. So to me, if other women want to get glammed up and dressed in black and wear a veil and celebrate Valentino, I think that is wonderful. I say the more the merrier, actually. That's great. And even Oscar nominated actress Terry Moore has been coming as the Lady in Black in the last few years. And she's playing the Lady in Black in a new independent film that's being made.
How would people come on, post-pandemic, of course, how would people come on a Karie Bible tour of Hollywood Forever?
Well, I have a website, cemeterytour.com. Obviously, because of the pandemic, the tour is on hold right now. Mm-hmm. Fingers crossed. Yeah. I am very much hoping I can resume maybe in March. Again, it's kind of we'll have to see how it goes kind of thing. I was lucky. I was able to do them for about 6 months during 2020. And the pandemic, what I did, everybody wore masks. I kept groups very tiny. I wore a voice amplification device to make my voice louder. And also mausoleums were completely optional. So for those who did not want to go in, we just talked about everything outside. So hopefully I can safely start doing this again soon. Again, it's just, we're kind of all in wait and see mode these days.
Yeah, because a lot of people out there want to meet Close-Up.
Yes, Close-Up is an absolute megastar. I met him because we have over 50 cats and feral cat colonies at the cemetery. And a little over a year ago, every time I would go to DeMille's grave on my tour, he would hear my voice and come running. And it was so funny. And I finally just started calling him Close-Up, like that line, I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille. And I didn't know if he was a boy or a girl at that time. He's a boy, but I didn't know that. So I thought, well, Close-Up can be gender neutral either way, you know?
Sure.
And he follows the tour. And in fact, I've even had people book the tour because they want to meet him. So I'm kind of becoming irrelevant to it. I mean, I kind of shepherd the people around, and Close-Up does the rest at this time. I just interject when and where that's even possible to do. But
yeah, he like Valentino, he's got star power as well.
It's funny, some people actually call him Valentino because he's got star power and he loves women. So yes, but he is such a Hollywood cat. And for people that worry about him, I tell them don't. All the cats at Hollywood Forever are spayed, neutered, vaccinated. They're fed every day by a team of cat caretakers. They get watered. They have a great life.
They have great lives. Yeah.
Also gets a lot of attention. And frankly, he rules the roost over there. Like, he is the king of that cemetery. He knows it and he likes it that way. So he's living his best life, I assure you.
Well, Karie, we thank you so much for taking some time to tell us about you and Hollywood Forever, Valentino.
Thank you.
Yeah. And also you gave the tour of Hollywood Forever for our film festival. We really appreciate that. Post-pandemic, I hope everyone out there who's coming to Hollywood will take one of Karie's tours, because they are incredible. They are fun. They're informative, and they're very, very respectful to the people that are there. It keeps their memory alive, and that's something that we all want to do, especially for a lot of these silent folks that have been forgotten. And so you're bringing their memories back. So we really appreciate that. Well,
you are too. And I thank you so much for doing the Newhallywood Film Festival. We're just so grateful when I meet other people who have the same passion for silent film and for these incredible artists and pioneers.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And once again, thanks for being here.
Thank you.